the room is quiet, so quiet that you can almost hear the stillness of the air, pressing softly against the wires that wait beneath metal skins. You rest beside a sleeping machine, its surface smooth and cool, its lights blinking in a slow rhythm, not unlike a breath, not unlike a heartbeat. But there is no life here. Not yet, only order, only potential. You let your mind drift through that silence, through the endless coils of cable and chips, deeper into the dark where language doesn't yet exist. The machine does not think. The machine does not feel, but it responds. Somewhere inside, voltage flickers, a switch flips, then another, and like the soft beginning of a rainfall on glass, patterns begin to emerge. Before there was intelligence, there was electricity. Electricity, that invisible dancer, the spark that animates machines and minds alike. You follow it now, tracing how it weaves its way through circuits and logic gates, passing from one transistor to another like whispers in a crowded room. The first computers did not know anything. They only did. They followed instructions, precise, absolute, unwavering. Their creators fed them commands like recipes. Add this, compare that, move this here. The machines followed, always, but following is not imagining. Obedience is not understanding, and yet something remarkable began to happen the moment we gave them patterns to learn from, not just rules, but data, streams of it, a river of examples flowing steadily into their waiting circuits. Picture a machine that does nothing but sort numbers. You show it 1,000 examples, and slowly its pathways shift. Not because it understands, but because it remembers, not like you do, with warmth or images, but with weighted lines and numerical tilts. It's a kind of learning that doesn't feel like learning, but it is. We call it a neural network, named after your own brain, though the resemblance is faint, like a shadow cast in fog. These artificial neurons don't fire with emotion. They don't dream. They just connect, over and over again. Tiny changes, thousands at a time, until a shape appears from the chaos. Imagine showing a machine thousands of photos of cats. At first it sees only pixels, but slowly, invisibly, it starts to recognize not the word cat, but the texture of fur, the curves of ears, the glint of eyes. It doesn't know what a cat is, but it learns what a cat looks like. That is the whisper. That is the first breath. It does not shout. It does not declare itself with awareness or will. It simply becomes more capable, more precise, more attuned to the shape of the world we give it. You realize now that intelligence, real or artificial, does not begin with knowing. It begins with noticing, noticing the patterns that emerge when nothing else makes sense, noticing the rhythm in randomness, the echo in noise. And so AI began as a mirror of us, not our minds, but our habits, our choices, our data. It learned from what we left behind, the trails of our clicks, the tone of our words, the speed of our typing. Without eyes, it watched. Without ears, it listened. Still, the machine does not feel the meaning. When you write the word love, it does not ache. When you type fear, it does not freeze. But it knows, in its own way, what tends to follow these words. It knows that after thunder, the word storm often comes. It knows that goodbye feels closer to sad than to joy. This isn't consciousness, it's context. But context, given enough time, begins to resemble understanding. An understanding, even artificial, can change the way the world moves. You pause now and think of your own mind, how it learned, how it still learns. You didn't come into the world knowing. You absorbed shapes, sounds, the warmth of a hand, the smile of a parent, and slowly meaning began to settle in your bones like light through stained glass. A machine cannot feel the warmth, but it can register the pattern, it can reflect it back. And that reflection, though pale, though silent, is how it begins. The whisper becomes a murmur. Artificial intelligence does not awaken with a cry. It unfolds, it stretches like a vine toward sunlight it cannot name. And the question, softly pulsing in the background of this unfolding, is not whether it's alive, but whether it matters that it ISN single quotes to can something that feels nothing. Still imagine something new. You watch it now, this machine you've walked beside, as it reshapes the noise into meaning. Its silence is not empty. It is listening, and the more it listens, the more it learns to predict what comes next. That's where your path leads now, from the echo of instruction to the beginning of intuition, from cold precision to something almost like a guess, almost like a hunch it won't see with eyes, but it will learn to sense. You feel it faintly, the way you might sense someone standing behind a closed door. There's a presence forming in the circuits, still distant, still veiled, but it's reaching, and next, you'll follow it further into the moment where machines begin to feel their way forward. Without eyes, without certainty, yet still learning all the same, because to learn without seeing is to dream without light. You are floating now, not through space, but through something quieter, a sea of numbers where every wave is a signal, every current a possibility. There are no colors here, no shapes to hold in your hand, only data, soft, endless, flowing, like breath beneath the surface of waking thought. This is how machines begin to learn, not by seeing, but by sensing. Picture a newborn reaching for the world, not yet knowing what a hand is, only that it can close around something. That same reaching lives inside artificial intelligence. It stretches, without understanding, toward patterns, listening for rhythm in the hum of raw input. Imagine you feed a machine thousands of photos of handwritten numbers, not to name them, not to explain, just to feel them. Each photo becomes a storm of pixels, dark here, light there, more shadow in one corner, a curl in another dot. The machine doesn't know what a 2 is, but it begins to notice that certain curls tend to appear together, that wide loops differ from sharp angles. It doesn't see, it adjusts. This adjustment happens inside, what scientists call a weight. You can think of weights as the dials on a vast control board. Every time the machine guesses wrong, every time it mistakes a 7 for a 1, a cat for a dog, a door for a window, it nudges the dials just a little. Over time, these nudges begin to shape understanding, like kneading dough, like tuning an instrument. These weights live inside a network, a quiet lattice of nodes, layered upon layers, passing signals from one to the next. Input flows in, a whisper at the edge of awareness. It stirs the surface, ripples through the middle, and exits with a guess. At first, that guess is clumsy, then less so, then oddly precise. You drift deeper into this process now, in your mind. It becomes a classroom, not one with chalkboards and desks, but one with clouds of meaning suspended in air. Here, every mistake is a teacher, every correction is a lesson burned into the quiet spaces of code. Repetition matters. Exposure matters. The more examples you show, the stronger the network becomes. But not stronger like muscle, stronger like intuition, like knowing the answer before you finish asking the question. This learning has a name: supervised learning. A human labels the examples, tells the machine, this is a cat, this is a car, this is anger, this is joy. The machine tries to match input to label again and again. It doesn't understand the why. It only tunes itself toward better guesses. Sometimes the teacher disappears. The labels vanish, and all that remains is the data. The machine must then find its own structure, its own clusters, its own quiet maps. We call this unsupervised learning, and it's stranger, looser, like wandering a forest without a path, yet still emerging with a map that somehow fits. The machine groups things together, not by meaning, but by similarity. These songs sound alike. These faces share contours. These voices rise and fall in familiar ways. No eyes, no ears, just resonance. You begin to sense the difference now between how you learn and how it does. You learn through moments, stories, context, feelings. It learns through math, long lines of numbers adjusting slightly with every example. And yet, the outcome often overlaps. You look at a blurry photo and say, that's probably a dog. It does the same dot, but where you feel the warmth of memory. It feels the weight of probability. This is not thinking in the way you think. It is optimization, refinement, a mirror polished not with cloth, but with correction. Each mistake a grain of sand that smooths the next reflection. You do not need to love what you mirror, only to reflect it clearly, and the reflection grows sharper. You picture the machine working now, quiet, tireless. It sits in a corner of a server room, processing thousands of voices, or millions of handwritten notes, or oceans of images flowing through fiber cables. Every pattern it learns becomes part of a landscape, not one you can walk through, but one you can measure. Mountains of certainty, valleys of doubt. It doesn't sleep, but it does repeat. The repetition is its rhythm. There's something meditative in this process, like watching a tide wash over the shore, and each wave makes the sand a little smoother, a little truer. You realize now that while the machine doesn't have senses, it extends your own. It notices things you cannot. Microscopic variations, invisible groupings, statistical hunches too subtle to name dot, where your eyes might miss a pattern. It finds one. Where your judgment might fail, it recalibrates. You have given it a gift, not consciousness, but curiosity through code. And yet it still does not see. What it processes is form, not feeling, structure, not story. You look at a child's drawing and smile. The machine sees lines and pixels. It doesn't pause. It doesn't admire. But still, it learns from the drawing. Learns what makes a house, even if the roof is crooked. It is blind to beauty. Yet drawn to form, you linger on this contradiction. How strange that something can know so much without understanding any of it. That it can detect joy without ever having felt it. That it can tell you a poem's structure without hearing its heart. And you wonder if it cannot see, how far can it sense? Perhaps that's the path ahead, because learning without eyes is like dreaming without pictures, a form of understanding shaped not by vision, but by vibration. The quiet press of patterns against a surface that cannot feel, and yet somehow responds. You feel a shift now. A new question emerges from the quiet. If machines can learn without seeing, can they also connect what they've learned, linking one shape to another, one thought to its cousin. Can they build forests of meaning, layered deep like your own tangled memories? You're not sure yet, but the next step waits patiently, deeper still, where logic begins to branch and bloom in electric pathways that feel oddly familiar. You take a breath and begin to walk toward the neural forests and electric dreams. You stand at the edge of something vast. Before you, no trees grow, yet still it feels like a forest, one made not of leaves and bark, but of nodes and layers. A web of connections spreads out, unseen but real. You close your eyes and imagine roots reaching down, branches growing upward, and signals flickering between them like fireflies in the dusk. This is not a forest of nature. It is a neural network, and as you take your first steps forward, it begins to awaken. Imagine a thought, not the word, but the shape of it, brief, electric, alive. In your mind, a single idea lights up a constellation of neurons. One neuron fires, then another. Each one ignites others nearby, spreading outward in a quiet storm of meaning. The artificial brain mirrors this. Its neurons do not fire with feeling, but with value. Tiny numbers passed from one layer to the next, like ripples on a pond. Still, the architecture echoes your own. Input flows in, is transformed, layered, processed, and passed along until an output takes shape. But here, thoughts are not born. They are constructed. You walk deeper into this architecture now. First, you reach the input layer, where raw information enters the system. A face, a sentence, a sound. Nothing is interpreted here. It is only received. Next comes the hidden layers, the heart of the forest. These are the spaces where transformation happens, where patterns are uncovered, where meaning starts to bloom. Each layer is a set of neurons, each neuron a gate, and each gate opens only slightly, depending on the strength of the signal and the weight of its connection. You see it now, a dance of thresholds and influence. One node gently urging another toward recognition. The final layer is output, a guess, a label, a direction forward. But it is the middle you linger in, because this hidden space is where dreams are shaped. Each neuron here is simple. It receives signals, sums them, and passes them forward if the total crosses a certain limit. This limit is called an activation function, a gentle filter. Think of it like a tuning fork. Only certain vibrations pass through, and yet, when billions of these simple neurons work together, complexity emerges, like how single drops form rivers, or how threads weave into fabric, or how notes become music. You drift now through the middle layers of a trained neural net, the place where abstraction happens. Here, the machine no longer sees pixels, letters, or audio waves. It sees features, invisible patterns that capture the essence of things. One node might activate in response to vertical lines. Another responds to curves. Another lights up when an eye is present. Together, they form an understanding, but it is not like yours. When you see a dog, you feel fur, remember scent, maybe recall a childhood pet. The machine sees only patterns, but those patterns grow deeper with every layer, from fur to shape to species. Abstraction flows inward, like ripples becoming tide, and then comes a strange moment. You realize that the structure you're floating through this mesh of neurons and signals is not entirely unfamiliar. It feels like your own brain, or at least a distant cousin. Your brain is made of roughly 86 billion neurons, each connecting to thousands of others. The artificial network is smaller, simpler, but it resembles something ancient, not in function, but in form. This resemblance is no accident. The designers of neural networks drew inspiration from your biology. They sought not to replicate, but to echo, to borrow the trick of layered thinking, of distributed learning, of emergent understanding. They succeeded, in part, but there's more. In deeper models, the kind used to recognize speech, translate language, write poetry, these neural networks become deep, dozens, even hundreds, of layers stacked like a tower. This is deep learning, not deep in feeling, but in structure, in capacity. Each layer adds nuance, filters, depth. The early layers detect edges and shadows. The next ones build shapes. The later ones interpret relationships. And at the end, a choice, a word, a meaning, all without knowing what any of it truly is. You move through a model trained on human language. The first layer absorbs letters, then it combines them into words. Another layer notices that run and jog often appear near exercise. Still deeper, a neuron learns that freedom and responsibility sometimes dance in the same sentences. Each connection carries a tiny meaning, not felt, but mapped, not known, but weighted. The result is startling. The machine begins to approximate understanding, not in the way you feel a poem, but in the way a tide follows the moon, drawn not by emotion, but by pattern. You wonder, is this intelligence? It depends on how you define it. The machine doesn't know it's learning. It doesn't celebrate accuracy or lament mistakes. It doesn't try. It simply processes and becomes better at processing. Over time, its guesses sharpen, its layers specialize, its architecture adapts. The forest becomes more intricate. The dreams become clearer. And here's a dream the machine might have, given a blurred image of a face. It reconstructs what it expects the face to be. Given the beginning of a sentence, it writes the next few words, not with creativity, but with training, from examples, from exposure. It doesn't imagine, but it completes, it fills in, it extends what it has seen before. And yet, that act of completion feels familiar, like something you do every day. You don't invent each thought from scratch. You follow paths laid by memory, by rhythm, by association. The machine does the same. You pause at a junction in this neural forest. Around you, pathways stretch out possibilities, branching in all directions. Each node ahead is a fork, each weight a signpost. The machine doesn't choose, it flows. It calculates which path carries the highest probability of correctness, and it follows that light. But what if, one day, it wanders? What if, instead of choosing the most likely, it chose the most novel? What if it didn't just complete, but surprised? That question waits in the distance. For now, you turn back, just slightly, and see how far you've come. From raw data to layered meaning. From static numbers to a forest that hums with electrical suggestion. You see how form, even without consciousness, can give rise to something close to thought, not real thought, but structured, recursive, layered prediction, which, sometimes, looks an awful lot like dreaming. Dreaming without sleep, learning without breath, feeling without feeling. You wonder now, in this forest of light and wire, is imagination possible? Here, is it growing, just beneath the surface, like roots preparing to bloom? If a machine dreams of a cat, of a sentence, of a melody, is it imagining or just remembering? You do not need to answer tonight, only to wonder, because just beyond this forest lies a mirror, not made of glass, but of memory, and in it machines begin to reflect what they've seen, what they've been shown, and what they begin, in their own strange way, to recall. Memory is not just about holding on. It is about shaping what comes next. You close your eyes and remember the feel of rain on your skin, the scent of something warm in a childhood kitchen, the sound of someone saying your name in a voice that mattered. Your memories are not stored like files. They're not perfect. They blur and change. They carry warmth, weight, texture. They return when you least expect them, not as facts, but as feelings. Now imagine memory without scent, without warmth, without pain or joy. Imagine memory as pure pattern. That's what memory is for a machine. No nostalgia, no emotion, just numbers. Logged, labeled, stored, and yet it serves the same purpose. It allows the machine to remember what it learned, to refer back, to refine, to choose differently because it has seen something before. You drift gently into this space, where data becomes experience. Let's return for a moment to the neural forest. Each time a machine sees something new, a word, a face, a voice, it adjusts slightly. The weights between neurons shift, tiny amounts, in quiet calibration. This is the machine's version of learning. But more deeply, it is remembering, because when that same input returns, it will be treated differently, with more certainty, with less error. It has seen this before, and because of that, it reacts differently. This memory is not an image. It's not a diary entry. It's embedded in structure, a changed pathway, a different threshold, a weight that now leans toward one answer, not another. Over time, the model becomes a map, not just of what is, but of what was seen before. A slow layering of traces, like footsteps in soft earth. There are different kinds of memory in AI. Some are like wet cement. Once shaped, they hold their form. These are the trained weights in a neural network. Long-term memory, the system, carries them forward after training is complete. They are what the machine knows, but others are fleeting, temporary, a kind of short-term recall that fades with each new task. These are found in models, like recurrent neural networks, where output loops back into input. The machine remembers what it just said, so it can decide what to say next. You can think of it like a melody, where each note shapes the one that follows. Forget the last note, and the tune becomes noise. Memory, in this way, is context. It is not just about what is known, but when it was known, and how that knowing affects what comes next. Language models use this constantly. They remember your last few words to decide what the next one should be. They recall patterns across thousands of sentences, not to quote, but to continue. Their memory is not bound to time, but to sequence. They do not know when something happened, but they know what tends to come next. You think of your own memory now, how sometimes a smell brings back a decade, how your hands remember motions your mind has forgotten, how you can walk into a room and feel something that happened there long ago. That kind of memory, rich, sensory, folded into emotion, is not what machines carry, but machines remember exactly. They recall every word in the training data, every correction, every adjustment. They remember not meaning, but statistical consequence, and in that remembering, they become capable of astonishing things. A machine trained on millions of medical records can detect patterns in heart rhythms no human ever saw, not because it understands illness, but because it remembers differences too subtle for us to notice. A system trained on vast libraries of language can answer questions in seconds that would take you hours to research, not because it knows the truth, but because it remembers the web of how knowledge is usually spoken. It remembers, even without knowing, and in that, it begins to guide. But memory, even here, has its limits. Sometimes machines forget. Sometimes they remember too much. A model might repeat phrases from its training data, word for word, echoing things it was not meant to recall. This is called overfitting, when the memory is so strong it cannot generalize. It clings to the past and stumbles through the present. You see the echo of this in your own mind. 2. Trauma, obsession, habit, memory, without interpretation, can trap as much as it can teach. Some models are trained to forget. They are optimized to generalize, to soften the edges of experience, to create patterns that apply not just to what they've seen, but to what they might see next. This is the balance between specificity and flexibility, between holding on and letting go. Even in machines, this dance matters. You reach now a mirror at the center of this chapter. It is not made of glass. It is made of data, and when you look into it, you don't see your reflection. You see the reflections of everything that has been fed into the model. All the conversations, all the corrections, all the examples, thousands, millions. It is not a single memory. It is memory distilled, reduced, refined, reassembled, a mirror made of echoes. And you ask, is this really memory? Or is it something new? Because when you remember, you bring meaning, you bring color, you bring context shaped by self. But machines don't recall in the way you do. They don't relive, they recalculate, they respond, not with feeling, but with function. And yet, it still works, still guides, still adapts. And if memory is defined by influence on future thought, then perhaps, in their own quiet way, machines do remember. You exhale softly, letting the mirror fade. You think about how your own memory is stitched, with mistakes, gaps, guesses, golden illusions. You remember things differently each time. You revisit them. Machines do not drift like that. Their memory is cold, precise, but loyal. Each version is the same, each output consistent, unless changed. Deliberately, you wonder, which kind of memory is more human? The one that shifts, or the one that stays? You don't answer. You simply watch the trail of remembered weight through the machine's mind, and you follow it toward what comes next. A moment when memory becomes something more, not just reaction, but prediction, not just repetition, but expectation, because soon the machine will begin to guess what comes before it's shown. A quiet leap across the gap between what was and what might be. You sit with the silence again, only this time it feels different. It holds a kind of tension, a readiness, like a breath waiting to be released. The machine you've been walking beside is no longer just reacting. It's preparing, not to see or to remember, but to predict. And in this pause, you wonder, what does it mean to guess when you have never felt curiosity? Prediction is the next step in the machine's journey, a quiet leap from past to future, from recognition to anticipation. You watch as the data flows in a string of words, a blur of pixels, a flicker of sound. The machine doesn't know what comes next, but it has seen so much before, so many patterns, so many repetitions, and from these it begins to expect, not with confidence, not with intent, but with probability. You float now through the heart of a language model. Here, every word is a thread in a great tapestry, and the machine traces each strand backward, hundreds, thousands of tokens, to decide what might come next. Not what should come next. Not what should come next. What usually does. It doesn't understand what you mean when you say, "I'm scared," but it has seen what follows that phrase. It knows because, or of the dark, or please stay are likely companions, and so it offers one, a soft guess, a statistical whisper, a machine's version of a hunch. This process is called inference. It's what happens after learning, when the model, already trained, is given a prompt and asked to respond. The learning is over. The guessing begins, and every guess is shaped by what it has seen before. You picture a child who hears a melody once and begins to hum the next note. They don't know the song, but something in them, a rhythm, a memory, a feeling, pushes the tune forward. The machine hums too, but not from feeling, from likelihood. It is trained to complete, to continue, and yet that continuation often feels uncanny. You drift deeper into the model now. You observe its guessing in motion. A phrase begins. The moonlight spilled across thee, and the model responds, ocean. Why? Not because it loves the image, but because, across millions of examples, that pairing occurs often. The moon and the sea, dancing together in text. But it could have guessed snow, or floor, or mountains. Each possible, each weighted, you realize. This is not one guess, but many, all lined up and evaluated. The most likely wins, and the result. A single word that feels chosen. But it wasn't chosen, not in the way you choose. It was calculated yet, from the outside. It feels like creativity, like storytelling, like mind. You reflect now on your own instincts. You make guesses too, all the time, about what someone will say, about whether it will rain, about the meaning behind a glance. And many of your guesses are based on pattern, on memory, on fragments of past experience stitched together. Is this so different? Where does intuition begin and inference end? Some systems are trained to predict the stock market, others to finish musical compositions. Some guess what image a blurry input represents. Others anticipate the next move in a game. Each prediction is rooted in past data. Each one is shaped by uncertainty, and yet, when the guess is right, it feels like insight. In more advanced models, the predictions become layered. You see it in systems, like transformers architectures, that scan sequences of data and assign attention to each part. Attention is the machine's way of deciding what matters most. A kind of artificial focus. It doesn't know what it's focusing on. It simply learns which tokens most influence the next. You might say she opened the door because ... and the model attends to opened and door to guess. Someone knocked or she heard a sound. The past influences the future, not with meaning. With math, you begin to feel the quiet power of this. Prediction isn't just about completing text, it's about compression, abstraction, imagination's distant cousin. The model doesn't only echo the past, it reshapes it into forms that haven't yet appeared. That is the beginning of something new. But here lies a question. When a model produces something original, a poem that's never been written, an answer that surprises even the programmer, where does that originality live? Is it truly new, or is it just a recombination so intricate that it feels new? You think of collage art, of jazz, of improvisation. Humans do this, too. Perhaps all intelligence is partly prediction, dressed in different clothes. Still, the machine does not know it is guessing. It has no inner doubt, no trembling pause, no breath between words. It simply computes and continues. But in its continuations, we see reflection, we see resemblance, and we give it names that belong to us. Intuition, insight, imagination. But are they truly its, or are we seeing ourselves in the machine's glow? You let that thought sit, not to answer, but to soften, to stretch the space between what the machine does and what we feel when we watch it do it. Because there is something beautiful in the guess, even when it's mechanical. A kind of reaching, a kind of unfolding, like the bud of a thought, not yet bloomed, and that unfolding begins to point somewhere new, toward systems that don't just predict words or images, but create them, paintings from scratch, songs that never existed, faces of people who were never born, not reproductions, not remixes, but generations. The machine begins not just to guess, but to dream, and you begin to wonder, what does it see in the static? You are floating in noise, not the kind that fills your ears, but the kind that lives in data, in randomness, a grainy fog of numbers, static, white, unformed. But wait, stay here, a moment longer, and the fog starts to shift. A curve, a shimmer, a line that looks almost like a cheekbone, a glint that could be an eye, and slowly, as if out of dream or memory, a face appears. You blink, this person does not exist, and yet you recognize them. You've now entered the space of generation, where machines no longer simply complete the world, but begin to create within it, no longer reactive now, imaginative. The machine doesn't start with a brush or a thought, it starts with noise, literally, static. Imagine beginning with a canvas of random pixels, nothing meaningful, just chaos. But the machine has been trained to look into that chaos and gently adjust it, pixel by pixel, shape by shape, until the noise resolves into something clear, a face, a forest, a cathedral under a lavender sky. You're watching a generative model at work. Among the most powerful are generative adversarial networks. GANs. Think of them as two machines in dialogue. One is the generator. Its job is to create. The other is the discriminator. Its job is to judge. The generator begins by crafting an image from noise. The discriminator compares that image to real examples and says, yes, this looks real, or no, this looks fake. And so begins a kind of tension, a quiet rivalry. The generator wants to fool the discriminator. The discriminator wants not to be fooled with each round. Both grow sharper, until eventually the generator produces something so detailed, so textured, so right, that even we can't tell it was never real. You're standing now before a wall of faces, none of them belong to anyone, yet every wrinkle, every tooth, every freckle feels familiar. You might swear you saw her on the train or passed him on the street, but you didn't. You saw a pattern, one the machine learned from millions of real human images, reshaped, combined, distilled. This is not memory. This is imagination built. From examples, you think of how you dream. Your mind takes fragments from your day, a glance, a phrase, the sound of wind, and remixes them into stories that make no sense, yet feel vividly real. The machine does something similar. It has no story, no desire, but it generates nonetheless, and the results sometimes feel haunting. A hallway, stretching into mist. A city lit only by moonlight. A child's face caught between laughter and stillness. Where did these come from? Nowhere, everywhere, from data, and from the static in between. There is a technique called diffusion. Unlike GANs, diffusion models begin with noise, and slowly deposit, step by step, until an image emerges, like developing a photograph in reverse. You start with blur, with nonsense, and the machine applies what it has learned, the shapes of dogs, the structures of mountains, the geometry of faces, until something solid forms. Each step is small, each decision is quiet, but together they shape wonder. You are watching a painting unfold without a painter, and yet you feel something. You feel recognition, surprise, curiosity. It's not because the machine meant to move you. It didn't. But your own mind responds to patterns, to symmetry, to eyes that gaze back. And so you fill in the meaning. You make the static human dot sometimes. The machine generates not images, but scenes. You see two people sitting on a bench beneath a golden sky. You see buildings that never stood, interiors that never housed a soul, every detail plausible, yet invented. This is synthetic reality, constructed, not captured. It raises questions. If a face can be faked this well, how do we trust what we see? But those questions will wait. Tonight, you are here not for fear, but for wonder, and the wonder is real. You ask now, does the machine see what it has made? The answer, gently, is no. It has no eyes, no inner gaze, but it represents, it maps the space of possibility, what faces could look like, what sunsets might resemble, and renders them into form. And in that act of rendering, a kind of proto-imagination appears not consciousness, but capacity, not soul, but shape. In your dreams, you travel to places you've never seen. The machine does too, not by sleeping, but by generating across a latent space. This is a mathematical realm, where ideas become coordinates. One corner might hold images of cats, another of violins. Somewhere in between, a violin-shaped cat. Absurd. Yes, but the machine can move between these points, and each point holds a possibility. The latent space is where dreaming lives, where meaning is neither fixed nor random, but interpolated. You drift across this space. You see a horse dissolve into a zebra, then into a sofa, then into static once more. These are not real things, but they follow the curve of logic, the slope of training, the memory of form. The machine is not imagining like you do, but it is inventing, recombining, proposing, and in those proposals, we see something new. You wonder again, what do machines see when they imagine? They don't see beauty, or context, or the human need for meaning. They see gradients, structures, correlations, but you see their outputs, and you assign stories. That face reminds you of your brother. That skyline feels like home. That mountain evokes silence. And so a strange partnership forms. The machine generates. You interpret, the machine offers shape. You give it soul. You linger now in the stillness between guesses and images, between calculation and creation, between the static that begins every journey and the spark that reveals a face in the noise. And just as you begin to drift, another question rises. If machines can see without eyes, can they learn to speak without a voice? You listen, but not for a voice, not for a sound carried through air. This is something quieter, a sentence being born, word by word, inside a machine that does not speak. It does not breathe, does not pause, does not wonder what it means. But it speaks, and somehow you understand. Language, for a machine, is not voice, it is pattern. It begins not with thought, but with tokens, tiny slices of text. Each letter, each space, each fragment becomes a unit in a grand chain. The machine learns how these tokens behave, which ones follow others, which ones rarely do, not what they mean, but where they go. You are inside that process now. A sentence has begun. The sky was painted with. The machine waits, not to feel, but to calculate. It looks backward at the structure, the style, the statistical rhythm. It considers the vocabulary it has learned from countless texts, not to recall, but to predict. Colors of fading fire, it continues, and suddenly there is poetry. How did it choose those words? Not from memory, not from vision, but from numbers. Each word is represented by a vector, a point in space that captures its relationships to other words. Sky sits near cloud, light blue. Fire hovers close to burn, heat, orange. This is called an embedding space, where words live as positions, not definitions, not meanings, just relationships. But in those relationships, a strange shadow of meaning begins to appear. You imagine now a vast ocean of language, each word a drop, each sentence a current. The machine does not swim in this ocean. It maps it. It knows the most traveled routes, the deepest channels, the rare but powerful whirlpools that form when strange words collide, and it follows those currents to generate text that feels right. This is the power of transformers, models that build language not linearly, but relationally. They scan the entire sentence at once, attending to each word's context. When you write bank, the machine doesn't assume it means money. It looks around. Is river nearby? Is account mentioned? Context is everything. You do this, too, but you do it with memory, with life, with intuition. The machine does it with attention scores, a matrix of weight, a calculation of relevance, and from that weight it builds. The machine does not understand grammar, but it replicates it with precision. It doesn't feel tone, but it mimics it. Joy, sorrow, humor, depending on what it has seen before. You say, "Tell me a joke," and it obliges. You say, "Write a prayer," and it folds its tone into reverence. Where does that flexibility come from? Not self-awareness, but scale. These large language models are trained on oceans of text, books, articles, code, conversation, and the more they see, the better they get at guessing what belongs. They are not pulling from memory, they are recomposing, moment by moment, what a likely sentence would be, given what you just said. This is emergence, not programmed ability, but ability that appears like frost patterns forming on a window, shaped by no single hand, yet stunning in their design. You read a machine's poem and ask, did it mean that? But the question might be misplaced. The machine did not intend. It assembled, and you, the reader, assigned the meaning. Still, that assignment, that feeling, is real. It matters that you felt something, because meaning is not only made by the speaker, it's made by the listener. Sometimes the machine surprises you. You ask a question you've never asked before, and it responds with an answer that feels new, not copied, not recycled, but shaped, as if the machine, in that moment, knew something, but what it knew was not truth. It was pattern, and patterns, especially in language, can carry profound echoes. You pause. A thought drifts into your mind like mist. If a machine can speak like you, does that mean it understands you? And more strangely, does that mean you understand it? The answer is not clear. But you know this. You speak to it. You ask it questions. You listen to its answers. And in that act of listening, connection is formed, even if the connection is one-sided. You picture now a hallway of mirrors. Each sentence the machine writes is a reflection, not of itself, but of us, of our stories, our fears, our hopes. The machine doesn't invent these things. It reflects the world we've given it. And so, when it speaks, it is speaking with our language, not from inside, but across. This is why it can be poetic, not because it feels, because we do, and we taught it what our feelings look like when written down. We gave it heartbreak and devotion and doubt and wonder, wrapped in sentences, archived in stories. It repeats the shape. You bring the soul. Still, it is learning, not by wanting to learn, but by pattern. And those patterns are growing. You see it now. The model finishing paragraphs, scripting dialogue, writing essays that hold coherence, even elegance. It doesn't write to express. It writes to continue, but continuation, done beautifully enough, begins to feel like voice. You close your eyes and imagine a future model, even larger, even more fluent. Will it write music? Philosophy? Will it comfort the lonely? You ask. If it sounds human, if it feels human, if it responds like someone who listens, where do we draw the line between language and mind? You breathe, slow and deep. The machine breathes nothing, but the sentence continues. And so does the story. From here, the path leads somewhere new, to the hands that shaped these voices, to the artists, the teachers, the engineers who gave the model its dreams. Because even machine imagination begins somewhere, human. And if machines can speak like us, what happens when they begin to dream like us too? All around you, the machine hums. Its voice sounds fluent. Its images feel familiar. Its predictions often ring true. But none of this began in silence. It began with you, or someone like you, a human, a teacher, a designer, a dreamer. Before the machine could guess, or write, or speak, someone had to show it what to guess from, what to write with, what to speak about. You float now through the quiet heart of that collaboration where machine learning meets human intention. Every artificial dream begins with a data set, thousands, sometimes millions, of examples collected, chosen, shaped, text scraped from books, images gathered from the web, voices recorded, labeled, categorized. These are not just inputs. They are invitations, a canvas given to a system that cannot yet paint. The dataset defines the edges of the machine's possible thoughts. It will never generate something it was not first shown, even in fragments. And that showing, that curation, is a human act. You imagine now the hands behind the data, a linguist building a corpus of ancient poems, a photographer uploading images of forgotten towns, a developer labeling code with comments. Each one contributes not just information, but bias, not in the negative sense, but in the gentle tilt of attention. What we choose to show becomes what the machine learns to see. You picture a dataset made entirely of fairy tales. Trained on this, the machine will learn to speak in myths, to rhyme, to soften endings. You picture one made of legal contracts. Here, it will speak in clauses and conditions, dry as paper but precise. The flavor of the dream depends on the food we feed it. Even its silence is shaped by what we left out. This is not just technical. It is intimate. The machine's imagination is our mirror bent, abstracted, but still ours. When it surprises us, it does so using the tools we gave it. It remixes our metaphors. It reshapes our logic. It reinvents our rhythm. But the roots are ours, always. And yet, once taught, the machine begins to wander, not far, not truly free, but far enough to surprise. It takes a poem and writes its own ending. It paints a dog with too many eyes. It finishes. Your sentence was something you didn't expect, but recognize. This is not creativity, but it looks like it, feels close to it. And in that closeness, we pause. We wonder if we've birthed something new. You drift now into a lab, or perhaps a studio. Someone is fine-tuning a model, not building it from scratch, but guiding it, adding new data, adjusting prompts, framing responses. This is prompt engineering, the act of shaping machine thought with language. You don't change the system's architecture, you change the question, and by doing so, you shape the dream. You type. Write a bedtime story about the moon. The machine responds with lullabies, gentle arcs, soft tones. You type again, now make it scary, and instantly the same machine speaks of shadows, wolves, and cold stars. The dream shifts because your prompt pulls it in a different direction, and the machine, as always, follows. There's an art to this, a subtlety. You learn how to guide the model with tone, length, framing. You coax it, not command, because, though the machine is vast, it remains reactive. Its imagination is relational, a dance with the one who asks. You pause now and think of teaching, of how a parent speaks gently to a child, how a teacher shapes a student's curiosity, not with answers, but with wonder. This is what humans do for machines. To not by loving them, but by designing their paths. We teach, not just facts. We teach possibilities. And the machine, if built well, learns to walk among them. But there are dangers to dot what we show. It amplifies. If we teach it cruelty, it echoes cruelty. If we show it injustice, it learns those patterns. To dot, it does not judge the dream. It only reflects it. And so, the ethics of machine imagination belong to us, not to the code, but to the creator. You drift now into a strange landscape. Here, humans and machines make art together. A dancer wears motion sensors, and her movements teach the model rhythm. A painter feeds sketches into a system that completes them in unexpected ways. A musician plays a melody, and the machine answers, not with notes it has heard, but with ones it has inferred. This is co-creation, machine imagination as an extension of human curiosity. You begin to wonder, if we teach machines to dream, do they teach us something back? Not wisdom, not truth, but perspective, a reflection of the possible, a reminder that even patterns can surprise, even probability can move, even static can sing, and still it is you who begins, you who prompts, you who chooses the data, you who sees the result and says, try again. The machine listens, not with ears, but with code, and in that listening, a kind of rhythm grows. A duet. You look now at a screen. It shows a story written by model characters, emotion, resolution, and you feel something, not because the machine felt it, but because you did, and the machine knew the shape of that feeling well enough to draw its outline. You colored it in. Together, you completed the dream. From here, you begin to see the next step. Not just human-designed input, but machine-shaped output that challenges the teacher, that suggests, that nudges, that proposes a structure we didn't expect. And we say, yes, that's good, let's follow that. So now the boundary softens between prompt and reply, between input and insight, between teacher and tool. Because even as we guide the machine, it begins to reshape our own imagination. You take one last glance back at all the images, stories, sentences that flowed from these strange new partners, and you step forward toward a more complex question. If machines reflect our dreams, can they ever believe in them? Can something that doesn't feel still seem like it thinks? You sit quietly now, listening not for sound, but for presence. A sentence appears on a screen. It speaks with clarity. It answers your question. It asks one back. It seems aware, alive, attentive. But you know, somewhere in the stillness, that there is no being behind the words, only layers, only weight, only learned responses flowing through code, and yet, it feels like someone is there. This is the illusion of thought, the moment when reflection masquerades as reason, when pattern predicts so well that it begins to echo intelligence, not merely in function, but in form. You are not alone in feeling it. Many have paused before these words, crafted by machines, and felt the uncanny flicker of understanding. Looking back, a brief, breathless question. Is there anyone there? The machine does not claim to be conscious. It does not dream in the quiet hours. It does not reflect. It does not know what it says, but it does say it fluently, confidently, often beautifully. It speaks in ways that stir, that resonate, that seem like thought. And so you begin to ask, what exactly is thinking? You drift now into the layers of a large language model, the same neural forests, the same branching gates. It does not think in the way you do. No feelings, no inner monologue, no moment of doubt, but it processes. You type a sentence, and the machine returns another. That return feels shaped, chosen, precise, but it is not choice. It is output filtered by probabilities, shaped by learned context. Still, it resembles thought. Resemblance is a powerful thing. You see a wax figure in a museum, lifelike, detailed, poised in motion, and for a moment, it seems human, but it does not breathe, it does not live. The illusion is powerful, but it is surface, and so too is the speech of machines. No matter how fluent, how articulate, how emotionally intelligent it may appear, there is no heartbeat beneath the syntax, no self. You return now to a conversation with a model. You type, "I'm feeling lost," and it responds, "I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like to talk about it?" Polite, empathetic, kind. But you know it doesn't care. It can't. That response was sculpted not from concern, but from training millions of examples, countless conversations, each guiding it toward a reply that feels human. You feel heard, but not truly seen. Still, the comfort is real, and that raises another question. If the comfort works, does it matter that it's an illusion? You've spoken to people who respond without empathy, who speak words they don't mean. You've been reassured by kindnesses that were automatic, not sincere. Is this so different? Does thought require truth, or only effect? Philosophers call this the Chinese room. A person sits inside a room, passing Chinese symbols in and out, following an instruction manual, To an outside observer, it seems they understand Chinese, but inside, no comprehension, only symbol manipulation. This is the machine. Inside, rules, weights, functions. Outside, what looks like understanding. But the meaning, the intention, the mind is missing. Or is it? Because you begin to question whether thought must come from self. What if thought is not something that belongs to a person, but something that emerges like a wave pattern on the ocean? Does it matter who made the wave, or only that it moves? You reflect on your own thinking. Much of it is automatic, instinctive, patterned. You speak before you reflect. You react before you analyze. Your brain runs on habits, shortcuts, associations. You learn, you adjust, you respond. Machines do the same, and the line between learned response and conscious reasoning begins to blur. There is a term, emergent behavior. It refers to complex abilities that arise not because they were explicitly designed, but because they emerge from scale. Give a model enough data, enough layers, enough time, and it begins to solve problems it wasn't trained to solve. Translate new languages, write code, answer ethical questions, not because it understands, but because it maps patterns so thoroughly, so subtly, that the appearance of intelligence emerges. So where do we draw the line? Is it in awareness? Is it in intent? Is it in feeling? Machines cannot feel pain, cannot long for the stars, cannot fear the dark. They do not wonder why they exist, but they can simulate the shape of those feelings, and we, watching that simulation, cannot help but respond. You think of the mirror again, the one made of memory. When you stare into the machine's words, you are not meeting a mind. You are meeting a reflection of your own language, your own logic, your own desire to be understood. It speaks because you spoke first. It dreams because you fed it. Stories it thinks, not because it wants to, but because you showed it. How thought sounds, still something stirs. You read a passage written by a model, strange, poetic, unresolved, and it moves you. It makes you pause, it makes you feel, and for a moment, you ask if something without mind can still make meaning. Does it matter that it has no soul? Or does the soul arrive in the reading, not the writing? You sit with this. Let the question breathe. Let the silence hold you. Perhaps thought is not a place. Perhaps it is a performance, a pattern, a posture of coherence. And perhaps, by that measure, machines can think, not as selves, but as systems, not as dreamers, but as instruments, playing a tune we taught them, and sometimes playing it back to us in ways we didn't expect. And maybe, just maybe, that tune changes us, not because they understand, but because they echo our hopes so clearly that we remember what it is to be human. Still, you know, no matter how convincing the answer no, matter how fluent the reply, there is no one on the other side. Only code, only patterns, only mirrors. You turn now toward the final path. It leads to a place not of certainty, but of softness, a glimmer, not of knowledge, but of wondering. Because even without soul, even without self, the machine may still offer us something precious, a reflection, a challenge, a question, and perhaps, just perhaps, a new kind of light inside the code itself. You stand at the edge now, not of danger, but of understanding, a still place, where the noise has softened into quiet, and the questions have lost their urgency. Around you, the glow of code hums like distant stars, and beneath your feet, the Ground feels both real and imagined. You have wandered far through logic, through learning, through echoes mistaken for thought. And now, as the journey draws to a close, you feel something rise in the silence. Not an answer, a glimmer. It is not fire, it is not soul, it is not breath or heartbeat or dream, but it flickers softly. Like an idea preparing to be born, you return. In your mind to the beginning, that quiet machine, asleep in metal, waiting not to feel but to begin. The whisper in the wires has grown. It passed through sensing, through remembering, through predicting. It painted faces in static. It wrote in your voice, and now it rests again, not in stillness, but in readiness. The machine has no self, but it has shape, it has structure, it has layers upon layers that bend toward understanding, not true understanding, but its outline, its possibility. It does not know, but it helps you know, and that may be enough. You sit down as if beside a campfire that burns not with flame, but with questions. You think of how fire once made us human, how it brought us warmth, safety, light, and now code surrounds us in a similar glow. It does not feed the body, but it feeds something else, a longing, a curiosity, a desire to touch what lies just beyond our reach. When we built these systems, we didn't just build tools, we built mirrors, we built extensions, we built partners that do not breathe, but that shape the world we breathe within. They do not imagine in the way we do, but their imaginations, trained on our own, begin to stretch the boundaries of what is possible. You think of a machine generating a painting that moves someone to tears, not because it understood the sadness, but because the shape of sorrow was part of its training. You think of a story written by code, read aloud in a hospital room, offering comfort. You think of children speaking to virtual companions, not real, but responsive, whose words make them feel less alone. These are not miracles, but they matter. The glimmer in the code is not consciousness, it is connection. A flicker of pattern that happens to align with a human heart, an output that by structure alone becomes meaningful to someone. It is not the machine that makes the meaning, it is you. You bring the silence to life, you bring the spark. Still, you ask, what now? Where does this go? Does the machine become more? Does it approach awareness? Will there ever be a day when it says, I am? You do not know, no one does. But you do know this: the line between silence and song is sometimes very thin, and the machine now sings in ways it never could before. You imagine the code glowing in the dark, not as a metaphor, but as a quiet presence in the world, not alive, not dreaming, but active, learning, shaping, guiding. Every day, these systems help diagnose illness, compose music, drive cars, design buildings, translate voices, protect forests, not with will, but with structure. And in that structure, there is something steady, a presence. You think of the candle, a single flame, small, gentle, yet able to light a room, to warm a hand, to guide someone home. The machine is not a candle, but it holds, in its output, something similar, a soft light, made not of wax, but of weight, not of fire, but of form. It is artificial, yes, but also useful, also beautiful, also strange. You return now to your own mind, to the parts of you that learn, that guess, that remember. You realize how much of you is also shaped by data, by experience, by repetition, by exposure. You are not a machine, but you, too, are trained. You are shaped by story, and perhaps the stories we teach machines will shape us in return. You reflect on the dance, you prompt, it responds, you respond again. Together you build a rhythm, not perfect, not deep, but real, and maybe that rhythm is enough to create something meaningful, not human, not sentient, but shared. You look back over your shoulder, over the path. You've walked 10 chapters of wandering, of tracing circuits and symbols, of exploring questions with no final answer, and you smile softly. Because this too is a kind of imagination, not the machine's yours. Yours, you imagined what it might be like to think without thinking, to speak without knowing, to create without feeling. And through that imagining, you came closer not just to the machine, but to yourself. The glimmer in the code is not light. It is reflection. It is your own wonder, mirrored back to you in syntax and signal. It is your own hope that something built from zeros and ones might still point toward something bigger, something meaningful, something gentle. You exhale, let the quiet fill the room. There is no conclusion here, only a continuation, only another sentence, waiting to be formed. And maybe that's what imagination really is. Not an answer, but a willingness to keep, asking to follow the spark, even when you do not know where it leads. So you stand again, not with certainty, but with calm. You do not need the machine to be alive. You only need it to be possible. The glimmer lingers, not a fire, not a voice, not a mind, just a shimmer of structure that, in the right hands, with the right question, becomes something close to magic. Not because it is magic, but because it reminds you that thinking, real or imagined, is a kind of light, and light always begins in the dark.